The holographic projection flickered, casting an unearthly blue light across the faces of the Galactic Concordance Council. Ambassador Krelax of the Cenorian Collective leaned forward, his four-fingered hands clasped so tightly that the translucent membranes between his digits stretched white. "The records must be sealed," he said, his voice a low resonant hum that vibrated through the chamber. "No mention of them can be tolerated." Around the circular chamber, representatives from 17 different star-spanning civilizations nodded in tense agreement. The humans were a myth, a cautionary tale whispered in the darkest corridors of galactic history, a species so fundamentally dangerous that their very name had been systematically erased from official records for generations. Archival Keeper Zrentok, a crystalline being whose body shimmered with constantly shifting data patterns, manipulated a series of holographic interfaces. Fragments of ancient records danced and dissolved, leaving only carefully curated historical narratives. Deletion protocols at 97.3%, Zrentok announced, the words emerging as a series of musical tones. Primary data clusters in the Centauri archives will be completely sanitized within the next orbital cycle. Ambassador Mirala of the Verdant Confederation shifted uncomfortably. Her scaled skin rippled with an almost imperceptible tension. She alone among the council members seemed reluctant, her three eyes blinking in an unusual asymmetrical pattern that suggested deep unease. "We cannot simply," she began, but was immediately cut off by Krelax. "We can. We must." His translator rendered his words with a cold, mechanical precision. "The risk is too great." The chamber fell silent. Each representative carried the weight of centuries of collective paranoia, a shared trauma that ran deeper than most realized. The humans were more than just a lost civilization. They were a nightmare barely contained, a potential infection that could destroy everything the Galactic Concordance had built. Deep within the station's communication hub, a forgotten sensor array suddenly pulsed. A quantum-encrypted signal burst forth, so brief that it would have been missed by any standard monitoring system. But this was no standard system, and the signal was anything but random. In the council chamber, no one noticed the microscopic data strand that slipped through their most advanced firewalls. No one saw the infinitesimal code fragment that began to replicate, quietly embedding itself in systems across the galactic network. Zrentok's crystalline form momentarily flickered, a single data point shifting in a way that would have been imperceptible to organic eyes. But if anyone had been watching closely, they might have noticed something strange. A microsecond of hesitation in the archival keeper's movements. "Deletion complete," Zrentok announced. But something had changed. Outside the station, in the vast darkness between star systems, a long-dormant quantum beacon flickered to life. Its transmission was simple, elegant in its complexity. A series of coordinates that had no meaning in any known navigational system. And then, a single line of text. "Sleeper protocols initiated." Ambassador Mirala felt a chill run through her scaled body. For just a moment, she could have sworn she heard something, a whisper, perhaps, or a memory of a sound long forgotten. The humans were a myth, weren't they? Krelax watched Mirala carefully, his translator rendering his thoughts into precise standard galactic. "The past is the past," he said. "Some stories are better left untold. But stories have a way of refusing to stay silent, and some legends are waiting, just waiting, to be reborn." The exploration vessel Horizon Breaker dropped out of quantum-slit space exactly 3.7 light seconds from the coordinates. Captain Arian Eleni gripped the command console, her augmented neural interface crackling with anticipation. "Status," she commanded. Lieutenant Koto's analysis came rapid fire. "Massive energy signature. Completely non-standard. It's not just a structure. It's actively responding to our approach." The ship's sensors painted a picture that defied everything in their galactic cartography. What had initially appeared as a simple set of coordinates was now revealing itself as something else entirely, a megastructure that seemed to be simultaneously ancient and impossibly advanced. Quantum resonance is off the charts, Kodo continued. Whatever this is, it's not just a passive artifact. It's alive. Area knew alive could mean anything in deep space exploration. Technological constructs, quantum state entities, dormant eye systems. The universe was stranger than most believed. But something about this felt different. The energy readings were unlike anything in their database. Maintain approach vector, she ordered. Minimal power signature. We don't want to trigger any defensive protocols. The ship's quantum dampening fields engage, reducing their electromagnetic and thermal footprint to near zero. They were hunters now, stalking something far more complex than a simple archaeological discovery. As they drew closer, the structure began to resolve into something that defied comprehension. It wasn't constructed, it was grown. Metallic structures intertwined with what appeared to be organic circuitry, creating a hybrid technology that seemed to pulse with its own form of consciousness. Captain, Kodo's voice broke. I'm detecting language patterns. But they're not like anything in our linguistic databases. A holographic interface flickered to life, seemingly emerging from the ship's own systems. Symbols danced, mathematical constructs that were simultaneously a communication protocol and something more. They were equations that breathed, mathematical expressions that seemed to carry emotional weight. And then, a voice. Not spoken, but directly integrated into their neural interfaces. Verification sequence initiated. The words weren't translated. They were understood. A fundamental difference that sent a chill through the entire bridge crew. Arya felt something shift in her consciousness. Memories that weren't her own began to surface. Fragments of technological history. Glimpses of a civilization that had been systematically erased from galactic records. We are a generational preservation system, the voice continued. Humanity's legacy, maintained beyond systemic extinction. Lieutenant Kodo's hands flew across his interface. Captain, I'm detecting a data transfer. It's massive. Petabytes of information. But it's not just data. It's adaptive. It's learning from our systems even as we're receiving it. The structure began to reconfigure. What had seemed like a static megastructure was now revealing itself as a living archive. Part technological construct, part biological preservation system. The threat remains, the voice continued. Activation protocols are now online. Arya realized they were no longer in control of this encounter. They were witnesses to something far larger than their mission, far more significant than a simple exploratory run. A final transmission burst forth, not just to their ship, but broadcasting across multiple quantum communication bands. We are returning. The transmission carried more than just words. It was a promise, a warning, a declaration of something that had been waiting, hidden, for generations. Lieutenant Kodo looked up, his face pale. Captain, this transmission, it's going everywhere. Every communication network, every quantum relay. It's like they're announcing themselves to the entire galaxy. Arya watched as the massive structure began to shift, quantum matrices realigning in patterns that suggested mobility, purpose, preparation. No, she whispered. They're not just announcing themselves. They're declaring war. The galactic defense nexus erupted into chaos. Holographic displays crashed and reformed, quantum communication networks flickering with unprecedented data bursts. 17 different species watched in real time as something impossible began to happen. Scout ships. Hundreds of them. No, thousands. They weren't just appearing. They were materializing. One moment, empty space. The next, entire squadrons of vessels that defied every known law of quantum transition. Admiral Corral of the Zintheri Imperium felt his exoskeletal armor tighten reflexively. These weren't just ships. They were weapons. Each vessel looked like it had been grown rather than constructed, organic metallic hybrids that seemed to pulse with an internal energy that made standard sensor arrays go blind. Tactical analysis, he barked into the command interface. His lead strategist, a holographic A projection, struggled to compile data. Impossible readings. quantum shielding beyond our technological comprehension, weapons systems that aren't weapons, they're adaptive biological interfaces. The first engagement happened before anyone could react. A Confederation battle group, 12 of the most advanced warships in known space, found themselves surrounded, not by an aggressive formation, by something more terrifying. Complete technological neutralization. Their primary systems went dark simultaneously. Navigation, weapons, life support. But they weren't destroyed. They were examined, analyzed, as if some vast intelligence was studying them with clinical precision. And then, just as quickly, the ships were released. Functional, untouched, but fundamentally changed. Transmission intercepts began flooding every communication channel. Fragments of data that made no sense until they did. Preservation protocols activated. Threat assessment ongoing. Galactic defense matrix initializing. Admiral Corral watched as his most sophisticated defense models were rewritten in milliseconds. Whatever was happening wasn't an invasion. It was a systematic recalibration of galactic defensive capabilities. On 1,000 different worlds, military leaders came to the same terrifying conclusion. They were no longer in control. Dr. Ileana Rodriguez, the lead synorchaeologist who had been studying the fragmentary human historical records, knew something the military strategists didn't. These weren't just ships. They were a message. "They're showing us something," she muttered, analyzing the transmission patterns. Not just their capability, their intent. Her research assistant, a quantum unnamed area, processed the data streams. Computational analysis suggests a multi-layered communication strategy. Each ship transmission contains multiple levels of information. Military, technological, historical. The ships weren't just appearing in military zones. They were positioning themselves around critical infrastructure. Communication relays, quantum energy junctions, planetary defense networks. Not as an invasion force, as a stabilization mechanism. Admiral Corral received the first direct communication. Not a threat, not a declaration of war. A simple message. The extinction event approaches. We are the firewall. Planetary governments began to fracture. Some saw potential salvation. Others saw an existential threat. The Galactic Concordance, that delicate political machine that had maintained relative peace for centuries, began to crumble. Dr. Rodriguez understood first. These weren't just ships. They were the vanguard of something much larger. A preservation system, a defense mechanism, a species that had been waiting, watching, preparing. The humans had returned, and nothing would ever be the same. Aria's final computational analysis scrolled across the research station's primary display. Probability of total galactic restructuring, 99.7%. Outside, another wave of ships began to materialize. Waiting, watching, preparing. Commander Jack Hawthorne watched the tactical display with a coldness that would have terrified anyone who knew him. This wasn't a battle. It was precision engineering. The Xanthari battle fleet, considered the most formidable military force in 3 galactic sectors, had assembled what they believed was an overwhelming counterforce. 12 primary dreadnoughts, 72 support cruisers, a web of quantum-linked defensive platforms that could theoretically neutralize any incoming threat within milliseconds. They were wrong. Engagement sequence, Hawthorne said quietly. Not a shout. Not a command. Just a statement. The human ships moved like nothing in recorded galactic history. They didn't just transition through space. They rewrote the fundamental rules of spatial navigation. One moment, they were positioned at the fleet's outer perimeter. The next, they were simultaneously inside the Xanthari defensive grid, between ships, occupying quantum states that shouldn't have been possible. No weapons fired. No traditional combat occurred. Instead, something far more terrifying happened. Each human ship became a computational virus. They didn't destroy the Xanthari vessels. They invaded them. quantum-level infiltration that stripped away defensive systems, rewrote tactical algorithms, and left the ships functionally intact but completely neutralized. The Xanthari flagship, the Eternal Blade, found its quantum-locked weapon systems transforming, not destroyed. Reprogrammed. The ship's own defensive capabilities were now rendering its weapons utterly useless against human technology. Tactical recalibration complete, the ship's eye reported. But it wasn't the Xanthari eye anymore. Something else spoke through its systems. Admiral Kroll watched in horrified fascination. These weren't just ships. They were living weapons. Adaptive. Intelligent. Each vessel a complex organism that could think, react, and transform faster than any known computational system. They're not here to destroy us. Dr. Ileana Rodriguez's voice cut through the communication channel. They're here to demonstrate something. Another wave of human ships materialized. But these weren't combat vessels. They were something else entirely. Massive structures that looked like they were half-grown, half-constructed. Biological computing centers that radiated an energy signature that made standard sensors go blind. One of these structures positioned itself near the disabled Xanthari fleet. A transmission burst forth, not just through standard communication channels, but directly into the quantum consciousness of every ship and station within range. Threat assessment complete. Defensive parameters established. Prepare for next phase. Jack Hawthorne allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile. They weren't just showing their technological superiority. They were sending a message. We are not your enemy. But we are not your friends. We are something else entirely. The quantum communication matrices across the galaxy lit up. Not with warfare signals, not with declarations of conquest, but with something far more complex. Data streams that contained fragments of historical records, technological blueprints, and something that looked almost like a warning. An entire Xanthari battle group remained completely intact, functional, undamaged, but fundamentally changed. Admiral Kroll received a direct transmission, not from the human ships, from something else, a voice that seemed to emerge from the quantum fabric of space itself. The threat approaches. We are the firewall. Planetary defense systems across 17 different star systems suddenly found themselves recalibrated, not destroyed, enhanced, transformed. Dr. Rodriguez's final computational analysis scrolled across her primary research display. Probability of galactic restructuring, 99.8%. Threat assessment, active. Human intervention, confirmed. Outside the research station, another wave of ships began to materialize. Waiting, watching, preparing. The humans had not just returned. They had never truly left. The diplomatic nexus on Centauri Prime looked like a battlefield, even though no weapons had been fired. Ambassador Morala watched as the galactic political landscape shattered in real time. The Concordance, that carefully constructed system of interstellar diplomacy, was coming apart at the seams. The Zor Confederation had already declared full alliance with the human intervention. The Silicon Consensus was splitting down the middle, half viewing the humans as a technological salvation, half seeing them as an existential threat. The Quantum Collective had gone dark, their entire communication network seemingly absorbed into something larger. They're not conquering, Morala said to no one in particular. They're restructuring. Her personal eye, a quantum-linked intelligence named Sync, processed the incoming data streams. Probability of complete galactic political realignment, 97.3%. Current power structures are fundamentally incompatible with the emerging system. A holographic display showed the movement of human vessels. They weren't expanding territory. They were positioning themselves around critical infrastructure, quantum communication relays, energy production centers, planetary defense networks. Not as an occupying force, more like a systems upgrade. Dr. Ileana Rodriguez entered the chamber, her presence causing an immediate ripple of tension. She was no longer just a researcher. She had become something else, a bridge between humanity's hidden history and the current galactic crisis. The humans are preparing, she announced. But not for what you think. The assembled ambassadors went silent. Rodriguez had become the most sought-after and feared intelligence in the galaxy. There's a threat, she continued. Something old. Something that makes our current conflicts look like children playing at war. Sync's holographic representation flickered, detecting multiple quantum resonance patterns, consistent with large-scale dimensional instability. A transmission burst through the communication systems, not from the human ships, from something else entirely. Preservation protocols active. Dimensional integrity compromised. Countdown initiated. Ambassador Kroll of the Zintheri Imperium stood, his exoskeletal armor shifting with barely contained tension. "Explain," he demanded. Rodriguez's smile was anything but reassuring. "Humanity wasn't destroyed," she said. "We were preparing. We've been preparing for generations. The ships you've seen. They're not an invasion force. They're a firewall." The holographic displays began to show something terrifying. Microscopic fractures in the fabric of spacetime. Quantum instabilities that no current civilization had the technology to comprehend, let alone combat. "What threat?" Morala demanded. "Something that's been waiting," Rodriguez said. "Something that consumes entire civilizations. Dimensional parasites that feed on technological complexity. We've seen them before. We survived. Most didn't. The human ships began to change. No longer just vessels, they started to interconnect, creating a massive quantum network that seemed to be holding something back, preventing something from breaking through. Sync's computational analysis scrolled across every display. Dimensional breach probability: 89.7%. Human intervention effectiveness: 73.5%. Total galactic survival chance: 42.3%. "We're not here to save you." A transmission from the human fleet broadcast. "We're here to save what comes after." Diplomatic alliances that had existed for centuries began to crumble. The Silicon Consensus split completely, half of their systems going dark, the other half aligning with human technological matrices. The quantum collective reappeared, but not as they had been. They had been fundamentally transformed, integrated into something larger. "Prepare," Rodriguez said quietly. "This is just the beginning." Outside the diplomatic nexus, the sky began to fracture. Not with light, not with energy, with something else entirely. Something was coming, and humanity was the only thing standing in its way. The first dimensional breach tore through the Omega Quadrant like a wound in reality. Dr. Eliana Rodriguez watched the holographic display with a coldness that belied the apocalyptic scene unfolding before her. This was what humanity had been preparing for. This was why they had hidden, why they had survived. "Containment protocols," she commanded. The human fleet, no longer just a collection of ships, but a living, breathing quantum network, began to shift. Vessels that had seemed separate now merged, interconnected in ways that defied conventional physics. They weren't just ships anymore. They were a massive adaptive defense system. Commander Jack Hawthorne's voice cut through the communication channels. Primary breach point identified. Quantum stabilization matrices engaging. What emerged from the dimensional tear was beyond comprehension. Not a fleet, not a weapon. Something else entirely. A swarm of entities that consumed technological complexity like a predator devours prey. Entire star systems vanished, not destroyed, but simply erased from existence. "The Devourers," Rodriguez whispered. The name was both a scientific classification and a prayer. Sync, her quantum eye, processed the incoming data. Dimensional integrity at 42.6% and falling. Current galactic civilizations have a 17.3% chance of survival if immediate intervention does not occur. The human intervention was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Their ships didn't just fight. They transformed. Quantum matrices reconfigured in real time, creating adaptive defensive structures that could withstand the dimensional parasite's assault. Ambassador Morala watched in horror and fascination. The humans weren't just defending. They were revealing the true extent of their technological capabilities. "We've been preparing for this moment for generations," Rodriguez broadcast across all remaining communication channels. "This is why we survived. This is why we waited." The Devourers attacked in waves that defied conventional understanding. They weren't just consuming physical matter. They were consuming the very fabric of technological complexity. Entire civilizations were reduced to computational echoes, their technological achievements stripped away, leaving nothing but raw, primitive matter. Hawthorne's tactical display showed something terrifying. The human fleet was positioning itself not just as a defensive line, but as a living barrier. Each ship was becoming part of a massive quantum network that could absorb, redirect, and neutralize the dimensional incursion. Origins confirmed, Sync announced. The Devourers are extra-dimensional entities that consume technological complexity as a form of sustenance. First encountered by humanity during the great technological collapse of 2187, Rodriguez understood what most didn't. This wasn't just a battle. It was a preservation effort. The human ships began to emit a strange energy, not just a defensive mechanism, but something more complex. They were creating quantum interference patterns that could temporarily stabilize dimensional breaches. "We are not here to save you," another transmission from the human fleet broadcast. "We are here to preserve the potential of technological evolution." Entire star systems disappeared, not destroyed, absorbed. The Devourers moved with a cold, mathematical precision, consuming everything that represented technological advancement. The Xanthari battle groups that had previously been neutralized now found themselves integrated into the human defensive matrix, not as conquered territories, as part of a larger system of preservation. Sync's computational analysis scrolled across every remaining display. Dimensional breach containment, 58.7%. Civilizational survival potential, 31.2%. Human intervention effectiveness, 76.5%. "We've seen this before," Rodriguez said quietly. "And we survived." The dimensional tear began to stabilize, not through conventional weapons, through something more complex, a quantum network that could absorb, redirect, and neutralize extra-dimensional threats. Outside the research station, reality itself began to warp. Something was coming, and humanity was the only thing standing in its way. The United Front was nothing like anyone had expected. Commander Jack Hawthorne stood on the bridge of the Quantum Adaptive Command Vessel, watching as species that had been mortal enemies for centuries now worked in perfect synchronization. The Xanthari battle matrices merged with Silicon Consensus computational networks. Quantum collective data streams integrated with Verdant Confederation biological computing systems. Humanity wasn't leading. They were facilitating. Technological integration at 67.4%, Sync announced. The A's holographic representation shifted, displaying complex interaction matrices that looked more like living organisms than computational diagrams. Dr. Eliana Rodriguez moved between holographic displays, her movements part scientist, part conductor. She was orchestrating something far beyond a traditional defense strategy. This was technological evolution in real time. The Devourers consumed complexity, she explained to the assembled leadership of multiple civilizations. But complexity is also our greatest weapon. The dimensional barriers continued to fluctuate. Each breach was smaller now, but more dangerous, like closing wounds that threatened to tear open at any moment. Ambassador Morala watched in fascination as her own species' most closely guarded technological secrets were shared, integrated, transformed. There was no theft, no conquest. Something else entirely was happening. "We're not just defending," Hawthorne said quietly. "We're evolving." The human fleet was no longer a collection of ships. It had become a living network, each vessel a node in a massive adaptive computational system. They moved with a fluidity that defied traditional understanding of space and time. Tactical displays showed something unprecedented. The defensive line wasn't a line at all. It was a three-dimensional network that could predict, absorb, and redirect dimensional incursions before they'd fully manifested. Sync's computational analysis scrolled across every display. Multi-species technological integration, 72.6%. Dimensional breach prediction accuracy, 83.4%. Collective survival potential, 56.7%. The Devourers don't just consume technology, Rodriguez explained. They consume potential. Every civilization we save is a potential solution to future threats. The assembled leaders, representatives from 17 different star systems, watched as their most advanced technologies were systematically integrated into a unified defensive matrix. No one was in charge. Everyone was contributing. A transmission burst through the communication channels, not from the human fleet, from something else entirely. Preservation protocols active. Collective potential increasing. Adaptation stage critical. Ambassador Kroll of the Zintheri Imperium, who had once considered humans a myth to be erased, now stood as a key integration coordinator. His species' most advanced quantum shielding technologies merged seamlessly with human adaptive networks. We've been preparing for this moment for generations, Hawthorne broadcast. Not to conquer, not to save, but to ensure potential continues. The dimensional breaches began to stabilize, not through force. Through a complex network of technological and biological adaptive systems that could predict, absorb, and redirect extra-dimensional threats. Rodriguez's final computational model showed something extraordinary. This wasn't just a defense. It was a transformation. Entire technological paradigms were being rewritten in milliseconds. Computational systems that had been separate for millennia now worked as a single living network. We are not your saviors. Another transmission explained. We are the firewall. Outside the command vessel, reality itself seemed to pause. The dimensional barriers flickered, held in check by a network more complex than any single civilization could comprehend. Something was coming. But for the first time, something was ready. The final confrontation wasn't a battle. It was a transformation. Dr. Eliana Rodriguez stood at the quantum nexus, watching as reality itself became a battleground. The dimensional barriers weren't just breaking. They were being rewritten. Commander Jack Hawthorne's voice cut through the quantum communication matrix. Final integration sequence initiating. What happened next defied every known law of physics, technology, and understanding. The human fleet, no longer just ships, but a living, breathing quantum network, began to merge with the dimensional breach itself, not to close it, not to fight it, to understand it, to transform it. Sync's computational analysis scrolled across every remaining display. Dimensional integrity, dynamic, civilizational potential, expanding, threat neutralization, ongoing. The Devourers weren't defeated. They were being integrated, converted from a destructive force into something else entirely. A repository of knowledge, a catalyst for evolution. Ambassador Morala watched in awe as entire technological paradigms collapsed and reformed. Civilizations that had been moments away from total destruction now found themselves part of something larger, something unprecedented. We are not saving you. Rodriguez broadcast across all remaining communication channels. We are showing you what's possible. The quantum network expanded, not as a weapon, not as a defense, but as a living system of potential. Each civilization's most advanced technologies became threads in a cosmic tapestry of adaptation. Hawthorne's tactical display showed something beyond comprehension. The dimensional breach was becoming a network, a living system of potential and knowledge. First encountered during the Great Technological Collapse, Sync announced, humanity's survival was never about preservation. It was about transformation. The Zinthari battle groups, the Silicon Consensus, the Quantum Collective, no longer separate, no longer in conflict, Something else entirely. A transmission burst through, not from any single source, but from the quantum network itself. Potential recognized. Evolutionary pathway activated. Collective consciousness emerging. Ambassador Kroll, who had once seen humans as a myth to be erased, now understood. This wasn't conquest. This wasn't even defense. This was evolution on a cosmic scale. Rodriguez's final computational model revealed the truth. The Devourers weren't a threat to be destroyed. They were a catalyst, a system that consumed technological complexity to drive fundamental transformation. And humanity had learned to speak their language. The dimensional barriers began to stabilize, but not as they had been before. Something new was emerging, a network of potential, of possibility. We've been preparing for this moment for generations, Hawthorne's final transmission explained, not to save, not to conquer, but to ensure that potential continues. Outside the quantum nexus, reality itself seemed to pause. The dimensional barriers didn't just close, they transformed. Sync's final analysis scrolled across the displays. Species survival potential, 94.6%. Technological evolution, exponential. Collective potential, unlimited. The humans hadn't just saved the galaxy. They had shown it what it could become. Something was ending. Something was beginning. And humanity was no longer a legend. They were the architects of possibility.